Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of Policy Watch with me, Frank Pereira. The government on Wednesday approved a relief package for the stressed telecom sector, easing spectrum holding caps and extending the payment period for spectrum acquired in auctions to 16 years from 10 years. While the change in spectrum cap is expected to aid telecom sector consolidation, allowing operators to settle their dues to the government over a longer time period will boost cash flows of operators. The earnings of telecom operators grappling with a heavy debt load have come under further pressure following the entry of Reliance Jio in September 2016. The Mukesh Ambani-controlled company disrupted the telecom sector first through free services and later through ultra-cheap data tariffs, triggering a wave of telecom sector consolidation. On this edition of Policy Watch, we will analyze the relief package for the telecom operators in the country. Joining me on the program today are Ravi, Visvesvaraya, Sharda, Prasad, independent telecom consultant, and Rishi, executive editor of the Financial Express. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of Policy Watch. Ravi, Prasad, I'd like to begin with you first, of course, and let's first try and understand what really ails the telecom sector in the country.
Well, the telecom sector has been reeling under heavy debt burden for a very long time. It is one of the major causes of the non-performing assets of the public sector banks. And some of these we should have to break down to certain causes. Many of the causes are those of the telecom sector's own doing, but the majority of causes are because of factors beyond their control, such as policy decisions and legal decisions. A lot of the ills of the telecom sector I would trace back to the controversy over the 2G scam starting from 2008 onwards, which caused a heavy cash loss to the telecom industry because they really had to spend all the time battling in the courts. And the cancellation of the licenses, the 122 licenses by the Supreme Court in February 2012 was a death blow to the industry, because apart from the ones who jumped the queue and the ones who were, who had broken the rules, the majority of the licenses that were cancelled had not broken the rules, but the whole process got cancelled. The analogy is, if let's say you have the IAS entrance exams and let's say 100 people are found cheating, and instead of just arresting the 100 people who are found cheating, you cancel the entire examination, and there'll be 5 lakh people who have been honest and not cheated, and they also get trouble. So the decision cancelling the licenses really was the origin of the present crisis in the banking sector, in the telecom sector. The telecom sector. About 100,000 executives lost their jobs. Those job losses were permanent. Most of them had taken the loans from the public sector banks, so it is the banks that actually took the hit. So this is a very pragmatic decision of the government. In fact, it should have been taken quite a while ago.
Okay, on that note, and I'm going to bring in Rishi as well. Rishi, as Ravi Prasad has just elaborated, do you believe that the telecom relief package that has come in now has come at the most opportune moment?
It has come, meaning it won't be very fair to say it has come at the most opportune moment. It's actually, if I would say, it's too little and too late, because telecom sector has been in problems for quite some time, ever since spectrum auction prices were not fixed properly, and they started going very high. So much so that in 2016 auction, 700 megahertz band price was so high that it went unsold. Nobody touched it. And by basically just extending the tenure of payment for the deferred payment, that doesn't it only provides some cash flow in the immediate term to the operators, because it doesn't mean that the net present value remains intact. There is no relief in terms of interest rate or any such thing. So it is something like that I have to pay if I have taken a loan for my house and I have 13 installments to pay, the installment gets increased to 16 or 20. So yes, of course, it has come at a time. Cash flow relief also matters to the operators, because the cash flow, whatever the cash flow relief they will get, they may be able to invest it on their networks, which is very important at this moment, particularly when we have to go 4G and VoLTE. But if the government was really very serious about giving some kind of a relief, they should have looked at a more holistic way to reform the sector, in terms of looking at some very scientific formula by which spectrum prices, auction prices are determined, to look at the basically spectrum usage charges, whether you really need it to be what it is today or to reduce it further, about the license fee, whether the USO fund, which 5% which of the 8%, 5% which goes to the USO fund, whether that is still to be, whether that still makes sense. So it's like too little, too late.
Okay, too little, too late is what you're saying. Ravi Prasad, what does the relief package entail for the telecoms now?
Well, I totally agree with what Rishi Raj has said. The two major things that were decided on Wednesday were first that the tenure of the licenses, which they had to pay in 10 years, has been extended to 16 years.
But and how is that going to help the telecos now?
Well, it just only solves their immediate problem, but it doesn't solve the long-term problem.
So it's a quick fix, is what?
It's a quick fix just for just to solve the cash flow problem. But actually, over the tenure, they'll end up paying more. In fact, the government itself has said that they'll get 74,446 crores extra till 2035. That's because you're extending, they have to pay interest on the borrowings. It is just that it solves an immediate cash flow problem, but the amount that they pay will actually, the net present value will remain the same. But the government really has to look at whether you want to look at the telecom sector as a cash cow for the exchequer. Because in any policy, you'll have to look at the interests of the consumers, the interest of the exchequer, and that too is broken down into two areas: what the exchequer gets upfront, or what the exchequer will get over time, and look at the net present value or the internal rates of return of what the exchequer will get over time. You have to look at the interests of the telecom operators. You have to look at the interests of some of the equipment operators too, and the consumers. There is a precedent when in 1995, when the auction was there, and some of the bids were extremely high. Companies bid 85,000 crores, and then they found they couldn't pay up. And it was the industry's own fault. So the government was very well within their rights to cancel the licenses. But the NDA government of Atal Bihari Vajpayee took a very pragmatic decision and bailed out the operators for mistakes which the operators had themselves committed. But that was a pragmatic decision which led to the growth of the industry. The consumers benefited because when they changed from a fixed license fee to a pay-as-you-go revenue sharing scheme, the consumers benefited greatly, the tariffs dropped, the tele density increased. India came up with the lowest telecom tariffs in the world, and over a period of time, the government ended up with much more revenue than they would have got if they had just insisted on getting the license fee up front. So again, bailout packages have been known in the past, and this is certainly a good bailout package. As Rishi Raj said, it's too little, too late. It should have been done quite a long time ago, because ever since 2012, after the Supreme Court judgment, the industry has been suffering. And actually, it is the government bailing itself out, because the telecom operators have taken loans from the banks, and mostly the public sector banks.
Sure.
I mean, 4 lakh, out of the NPAs, about 4 lakh crores are from the telecom sector.
Telecom sector, yeah. Yeah. All right. Talking about a bailout package and saying that this is too little, too late, what more needs to be done, Rishi Raj? Can we expect a major bailout package in the days to come, looking at how the telecoms or the telecommunication companies have been suffering over the last few years? We've seen what has happened with Aircel as well, filing for bankruptcy. Are we going to see another Aircel-like situation with one of the other operators?
Let's not call it a bailout. Actually, what we need is a restructuring, some kind of a reform in the telecom sector. As Mr. Ravi Prasad gave a very nice historical perspective about 95, the license fee committed by the operators, they were not able to pay, and how the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government reformed the sector in such a manner that today we are reaping the benefits of that. The tariffs are low, the number of operators are more. So it's time to look at a second restructuring or reform of the sector, whereby earlier there was a license fee which is 8% of the adjusted gross revenue of the operators, which they pay every year. There's a spectrum usage charge which roughly comes to around 4 or 5% of their adjusted gross revenue. Now the problem is, at that point of time when they were paying such levies, the spectrum was given on subscriber linked criteria. So the government was, I am giving you spectrum, which is the basic raw material, and I am getting back through your license fee. I am giving you something for free. You have this much number of subscribers, I am giving you the spectrum, so you pay me back because you are earning a revenue, so a portion of it. Now, ever since 2010, when we shifted to auctions, now the companies are being heavy through their nose. They have very high auction fees. When the government is earning a lot through auctions, so obviously you need to basically bring down the license fee. The license fee should be nothing but some administrative charges, which should be about 1% or something.
Sure.
B, the USO fund, which is 5%, meaning you can easily bring down the license fee to 3%. Today, the 8% license fee is there, which the operators pay every year of their registered gross revenue. 5% go to USO fund. The USO fund was created long back, basically for rural terry density. So that what the government gets, government can spend that money for connection in rural areas, because rural will not be a priority for the private operators.
Indeed.
But nowadays, if you see, it's rural everywhere. The operators themselves have gone to the rural markets.
Right.
It's no more, it's Airtel or Idea or Vodafone have more rural connections or more rural coverage than today, say, BSNL may have, which is a state-owned company.
Sure.
So you will have to look at very holistically at a sector, bring out a total reform. You will have to examine how many operators you want per circle, whether you want, as we are moving, if you leave aside the state-owned operator, which is anyway a weak operator, we have almost moved to a 3 or 4 operator kind of a scenario. So
sure. Yeah, taking the point that Rishi Raj has just made forward, talking about a reform for the entire sector and a holistic approach needs to be taken is what he's suggesting. Yes. Quick closing comment from you on, is there any model that we can use or that we can replicate here in India?
No, we have to show the way to the world. There's no precedent from other countries. But I totally agree with Rishi Raj. He's just done a brilliant analysis of this. And typically what the operators are paying about 30% of their revenues under various levies. As Rishi Raj pointed out, there's the license fee, there's a spectrum usage charge, and the Universal Service Obligation Fund. And then, of course, they pay corporate income tax and service tax and everything. So this 30% is a huge burden, and there have to be ways to bring it down. And I totally agree with Rishi Raj that the license fee should be an administrative charge. And even there's a strong case for, for cheap spectrum, because telecom is an infrastructure sector, and you have to look at it not as a cash cow, as a revenue generator, but something that saves consumers time and money.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this segment of Policy Watch. I'd like to thank both my guests, Ravi, Prasad and Rishi Raj, for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. It's time for a short break now. On the other side, we will discuss what to expect from the next GST Council meet. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Policy Watch with me, Frank Pereira. The GST Council in its meeting on Saturday is likely to extend the deadline for filing of simplified sales return GSTR 3B by 3 months till June. The council, chaired by Finance Minister Arun Jaitley and comprising his state counterparts, is also expected to finalize a simplified return filing procedure for businesses registered under goods and services tax regime. Simplified sales return GSTR 3B was introduced in July, the month of GST rollout, to help businesses to file returns easily in the initial months of GST rollout. This was to be followed with filing of final returns GSTR 1, 2 and 3. With businesses complaining of difficulty in invoice matching while filing final returns, as well as complications in GSTN systems, the GST Council in November last year extended GSTR 3B filing requirement till the end of March 2018 and did away with filing of purchase return GSTR 2 and final return 3. In our next segment, we will discuss what to expect from the GST Council meet on Saturday. Joining me on the program now are Nitin Desai, former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, and Professor Aman Agarwal, Director, Indian Institute of Finance. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on Policy Watch today. Mr. Desai, I'd like to begin with you first, of course. Over the last few months since the GST rolled out in 2017, we've seen several reforms taking place as far as the GST is concerned. The GST Council meets again on Saturday. What is it that we can expect from them?
Well, basically what has been happening throughout, which is essentially a steady backtracking from what I have described as an over-sophisticated system introduced in an under-sophisticated market. Things like invoice matching and so on, which frankly, this is workable when everybody is more or less computerized, and when you go to a shop, you automatically get a bill from a cash machine which is linked to the computer system and so on and so forth. Now, this was rare. It was not the it is an exception in India. And even relatively big people had to do a lot of work to be GST compliant. And as far as the small guys are concerned, they didn't even have the beginnings of being compliant. So it's always been a steady backtracking, which I personally think is okay, because you know, it is better to get the people used to the idea of a uniform tax rate and start doing the more sophisticated things like invoice matching, etc., e-way bills. Now, e-way bills is another issue.
Yes.
You know? So I'd say that what I would expect is a continued relaxation of these conditions, mainly built around what was perhaps an over-sophisticated system, and I'm not sure that the networks that they've set up are capable of coping with that.
So do you believe over the months now people have become far more compliant, far more used to the GST?
I'm not sure about compliant. You will have to accept that if you depart from that model, there will be some loss in terms of compliance. There will be. That you have to accept. And I have always felt that in the interest of getting the idea of a uniform tax system accepted, it is okay, live with it for a while. Not for very long, maybe a year or two, but just live with it for a while. But no, I would expect some price in terms of compliance, because you don't have that automatic matching of, if I'm claiming a credit, I only get a credit if the fellow who supplied me has uploaded his invoice. Now that sort of thing is going to take a little time to work out. So I'd say that, yes, I will expect some price in terms of compliance.
Sure.
But at the same time, the simplification may mean that a lot of people, smaller people, who are preferring to stay out may now be less unwilling, because they are also under pressure from their buyers. I know that if we are selling to a company, those guys don't want to buy from people who are not registered for GST. So there is it's a two-sided thing. It may improve the enrollment of people who would otherwise have stayed out, but it will probably lead to some little drop in compliance, strict compliance in terms of claiming of credits, etc.
Sure. Let me bring in Professor Aman Agarwal now into the picture. You know, a lot has been said over the last few days and few weeks as well about GSTR3B, in fact. And, you know, the deadline has been extended. You know, it's expected to be extended again when the GST Council meets on Saturday. So, you know, what's the major difference between GSTR3B and GSTR 1, 2 and 3 really?
You see, they're trying to simplify it for the producers to actually go about filing and not be totally dependent on chartered accountants or professionals to do the job. And that's where the process is. Secondly, it is a question of actually bringing people into the system and reporting to take place. As rightly told by Mr. Desai, compliance is something which cannot happen overnight, and it takes time before we can actually expect all compliance to take place. So there would be an extension, which is, as you rightly said, maybe their simplification is on the call. The other problems which are also being faced is on the encashments of credits which are there, and still not almost all community are facing some problem or other because of mismatches or even otherwise encashments, and this is where I think the GST Council needs to look in. Apart from this, in my opinion, there may be some components which may be reduced and put into a lower tax bracket, as has been done in the past, looking at the way GST collections have taken place in the last 3-4 months, and I think that may also come in force in this GST Council meeting. I also presume that there may be a stand, although they will not introduce oil and the other or petroleum products into the GST as of today, but there may be a stand where they may take that we may keep a framework in which they would like to do, because it is a state subject and they would like to do that, because that has a direct benefit on almost all products and services and a multiplying effect, because the taxation on this oil component varies from 35% to about 70-75%.
Sure. That said, would you say that, you know, sooner it is brought under the GST ambit, the better it is?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to bring up. Sooner it is brought in, not only would it help the customers, it will reduce the tax burden, and ultimately it will bring in profitability, which we would like to see in the GDP figures of growth, both in the market and being felt by the people.
But do you see the states coming on board?
I think it's a question of how much time do they have now. It is not a question of whether they will come on board or not. I think they are very clearly understood with the CGST and SGST that they are getting some component of it, and they have started reaping the benefits of those flows coming to them. It's not that they are not getting flows. That was a big question when the system was proposed a year and a half back, but now they are comfortable with that. So I think when they understand this and they see the kind of benefits which can come in, both in terms of inflation control, benefits in the profitability, benefits in terms of growth component going up for the producers and for the consumers at the end of the day, I think they would certainly like to encash, because it is now a number game. It is not a question of how much little you sell. It is a question of how much can you actually sell and produce. And given the fact that we have seen a couple of investors meet taking place, they have happened with a lot of international flow and interest coming in, primarily because of GST, looking at one single tax. Now, if we really want to reap that benefit of bringing them in, and we're talking about UP becoming $1 trillion economy, Maharashtra becoming 1 trillion, if you're looking at those kind of, it may not be even 1 trillion, maybe half a trillion only, but if you're even targeting that, I think we will have to induce this, because this is a prime factor product which actually escalates all costs which are there in whether it's food, whether it's services, manufacturing, any segment we may have.
Sure. Mr. Desai, do you see that happening anytime soon? You know, the 50% of the GDP that is left out of the ambit of the GST coming under the GST anytime soon?
Not all of the 50%. I don't see things like agriculture, etc., coming in at any. I would draw a distinction between final products, final consumption products which have stayed out. Widely food, I would say alcohol. States are not going to give that up. It doesn't matter too much, because that's not a product which is used and which is an input except in some limited sense in some restaurant or hotel. But what he's mentioning, energy, petroleum, is a very different story. It's a fundamental intermediate input. And therefore, if you are leaving a big chunk of somebody's costs out of the credit system, there is going to be a problem. The difficulty I see is this: the states basically make money out of petroleum sales. The costs of subsidy are borne by the center. So when you get into trying to get the thing working so that there is a 50-50 share, that won't work, because the states today don't bear the cost of the subsidy. You shouldn't just look at the gross figure of what the center gets from the petroleum taxes. You must look at the net figure after you net out what it is in effect giving as a subsidy, and what is being borne indirectly also by the centrally owned public sector enterprises. So it's going to be a very difficult business.
So there's going to be a lot of hard bargaining, is what you're saying.
I'd say it will be so hard that I don't see an agreement that quickly and that easily, because this is an area where essentially the states have to give in a little to the interests of the center. If you want what you have elsewhere in the tax system, which is 50-50 sharing, then I think there will have to be some compromises, and I don't see that coming that quickly.
Sure. Okay. Professor Aman Agarwal, as far the other issue that Mr. Desai raised, in his opening remarks was that of the e-way bill. Can we see some kind of any finalization of the e-way bill is concerned, when it will be, when the rollout will actually happen, any forward movement on that?
No, I think that will still have to go with some time, because the fact that it is still not very clear with both the parties. In fact, the government has put it forward, but then when it comes to implementation, it is not very clear how things are working out, and it's a completely new animal, and I think we need to give it time for that. So maybe a few more months before they can adjust and they can expect it to become functional. The government is trying to educate to a great extent, and they are trying to produce, doing a lot of activities to educate people on the e-way bill. But I think it has to be a state initiative as well, where the state takes a further step in taking it forward to the producers and all, so that they can be more functional, and maybe they can loop in the chartered accountancy, the ICAI, and some similar other institutions which can actually put it forward and help facilitate. We have a large framework of educational institutions in the country, and if we are able to route it through them and give them local areas to actually help them do that, and I think the professors and academicians would not mind helping the government in this thing to happen. There may be a lot of going forward instead of just one machinery looking at this particular framework.
In the weeks and months to come, is it safe to say then there's only going to be further fine-tuning of what we already have rather than a new reform as such?
Yes, I think there will be an easing. As I said, there would be some items which may be further reduced off, and that will give an ease, because the objective today is to make the people at large feel comfortable. You see, there is a lot of gap which is still there, and they need to feel that comfort. Secondly, there is an issue which has arisen recently, which is about frauds. And they need to create some system which brings a stop at this fraud, because there's even recently a circular came out based on Mumbai track which happened. So that's where again the GST will look at that there is not a misuse of some of these benefits which the government is trying to give out, which always happens. Every system has some people who would like to play with it, but to reduce that kind of an incidence to happen and put people at comfort. So the ultimate objective, in my opinion, with this government having with GST is that the benefits which the companies should transfer gets transferred to the people. The consumer at the end of the day pays an appropriate price and not a high price, and the benefits not reaping to the consumer. All
right, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. You can always share your feedback at policywatch.feedback@gmail.com, and you can also tweet to us using our handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha Television. That's it from me. See you again next time.